Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, has a pretty stark warning. He believes the city is being intentionally destroyed. Now that is a heavy claim, and in this explainer, we're going to break down his argument step by step so we can really understand the who, the what, and maybe most importantly, the why behind this accusation.
Okay, so this right here, this is the core of Giuliani's entire argument. He's not saying the city's problems are just accidents or, mistakes. His claim is that the decline we're seeing is deliberate. This idea of purpose is the lens through which he looks at everything else, so let's definitely keep that in mind as we go.
So, let's really establish his foundational claim. For Giuliani, this isn't a story of policy failures. It's a story of what he sees as intentional sabotage. He argues that basically every problem the city faces can be traced back to a specific ideological motive to dismantle it from the inside out. So, if the motive is destruction, what does the evidence look like? Well, Giuliani points to a set of specific symptoms that, in his view, prove his case. He's basically presenting a diagnosis of a city in critical condition. In Giuliani's telling, New York is showing all the vital signs of a system in collapse. He identifies these three interconnected problem areas: fiscal, social, and demographic, which he claims are sending the city into this big downward spiral. And here's his list of specific charges. He's claiming residents are fleeing, and that the city's strategy is to just squeeze the wealthy until they leave too. This, he argues, is pushing the city toward what he calls technical bankruptcy, all of it driven by a budget he describes as dangerously, totally out of control. To illustrate the scale of what he considers fiscal irresponsibility, Giuliani points to this number: $243 billion. Now, it's important to note, this is the New York State budget, not the city's, but he uses it to make a broader point about what he sees as a culture of just rampant government spending that directly impacts the city.
And he drives his point home with this direct comparison. New York City, with 8.5 million people, has a bigger budget than the entire state of Florida, which has a population of 22 million. For Giuliani, this isn't just a budget anomaly. He presents it as Exhibit A for systemic waste and corruption.
A huge part of Giuliani's argument rests on a direct comparison. He contrasts the New York of his administration and the one that followed under Michael Bloomberg with the New York of today. He paints a picture of two completely different philosophies of governance.
So here's the timeline, according to Giuliani. He frames the 20-year period under his and Michael Bloomberg's leadership as a golden age. Then he marks 2014, when Mayor de Blasio's term started, as the big turning point, the beginning of what he calls a sharp, intentional decline that he believes is still happening today.
This slide really lays out the stark contrast he's painting. In his narrative, his era was defined by cutting government and taxes, and that resulted in a surplus and an urban renaissance. He then frames the current approach as a complete reversal, expanding government, raising taxes, which he claims is actively driving people out and leading straight to bankruptcy.
And this brings us right back to the motive. I mean, if the current path is so clearly destructive in his view, why follow it? Giuliani's answer is that it's not about results. It's about a deeply held ideology that is hostile to the city's success as we know it.
And he is not subtle about identifying this ideology. Giuliani directly labels former Mayor de Blasio a communist. He's really careful to state that in his view, this isn't just some insult, but a literal description of the political philosophy that he believes drove de Blasio's policy decisions. This brings us to the absolute core of his accusation, what he calls ideological hostility. According to Giuliani, the city's recent leaders don't just disagree with American principles of capitalism and freedom, he argues they actively oppose them, and their policies are therefore designed to dismantle the entire system. And he extends this line of argument to the current leadership as well, drawing a direct and, let's be honest, controversial parallel between their policies and the actions of authoritarian leaders like Stalin and Xi Jinping. In his words, it's a recipe for disaster for New York. So this all leads to a critical question, one that Giuliani addresses directly. If his diagnosis is correct, why do New Yorkers keep electing these leaders? His explanation shifts the focus from the politicians to the voters themselves. This is the puzzle at the center of the final part of his argument. Giuliani and the interviewer both characterize New Yorkers as very smart, very savvy people, which makes the election outcomes, in their view, all the more baffling. Why would they fall for it?
His explanation comes down to a few key factors. He points to low turnout and voter apathy, but he also argues that all the political energy is now concentrated on the far left, which he says lets those candidates dominate the crucial Democratic primaries. Ultimately, he concludes that a lot of voters have just given up.
This quote really captures the sense of disbelief at the core of his analysis. It frames the voters' choice not as a simple political disagreement, but as an embrace of candidates who, in his opinion, were openly dishonest about their intentions for the city. And this is the final, challenging question that emerges from Giuliani's entire argument. It takes his critique of New York's leaders and voters, and it turns it into a much bigger question about governance itself. It's a provocative thought to end on, leaving the future of the city, at least from his perspective, very much in doubt.